I'm Jeanette Pincus, and I get the pleasure of interviewing Barbara Stone today. This is February 7th, 2024. Barbara, what I'd like to start with first is if you can tell me about your family, parents, grandparents, like where you were born, things like that. Start.
Okay. I was born in Dallas, Texas, at what was called Florence Nightingale Hospital, and it became Baylor. My parents are both native Texans. My mother was born in Tyler, moved to Dallas at age 5. My father was born in Dallas. I have family going back quite a long way in the United States. A couple of great-grandparents were in Peoria, Illinois in the 1860s, and their daughter, my great-grandmother, wound up in Texas with her husband. Her husband showed up on the census in Mobile, Alabama in 1860 at age, I think, 14. And they eventually moved to Texas and had my grandfather, whom I knew, and then my mother was born to him and his wife. My mother's family lived in Tyler for a while and then moved to Dallas. My mother's grandmother, my great-grandmother, and several of her siblings came to Texas in 1881 from Königsberg, Germany. And they settled in places like Mejia and Groesbeck, and then eventually got to Tyler. And then the other side of the family, my father was Albert Green. Well, I didn't give my mother's name. It was Dorothy Panders Green. My father was an immigrant to New York from Romania in 1890. He was married to a woman who was mother to my older aunt, and she became ill. He was advised that she would do better if they moved to Texas where it was drier. So they did that, went to San Antonio. She did not survive. My grandfather remarried and married the woman who became who had my father and my younger aunt. My father was the baby. And they, for reasons I don't know, moved to Dallas. My grandmother was Bessie Lichtenstein, and we have Lichtenstein relatives here. And then my grandfather, Levy Green, was in the restaurant business and the bar business. My aunt has told me about his restaurant, or I think he had a bar that had to become a restaurant during Prohibition. So my family goes way back.
Do you know where that was located?
On Field Street. We didn't own the property, unfortunately.
Okay. Where was your family? Were they members of a synagogue or temple at that time?
Temple Emmanuel all the way through. My parents were confirmed there, both of them. My mother, from my earliest memories, I've heard wonderful things about Rabbi Lefkowitz. And when I was about, 5, I think, they brought me to Dallas to have a tonsillectomy to be done by a family friend named Morris Waldman. And during that trip, I remember being taken to Temple Emmanuel and meeting Rabbi Lefkowitz, and he was showing me the bima, and that's about all I remember because I was 5 years old. But it obviously was very important. It certainly was important to my mother.
So you mentioned, now where were you living at the time when you were really young?
Louisiana.
Okay.
After World War II broke out, my father was a food chemist by training, and he was asked to go to southern Louisiana and run sweet potato processing plant, which was used to feed the troops who were fighting overseas. And we stayed there. I was maybe 3 at the time. We stayed there until I was 13. first in Opelousas, and then after a couple of years, we moved to Lafayette, and that's where my childhood was.
So what was Jewish life like there?
Well, it existed. It was really pleasant, but there were not very many of us. I was one of 3 Jewish children in my elementary school. We had a synagogue. We called it a temple. The word synagogue wasn't used. It was classical reform, very, very reform. We had no rabbi. We had lay leadership. My father and a professor at the local college were pretty much the leaders of the synagogue as far as services were concerned. Services included virtually no Hebrew. We had, of course, no bar bat mitzvahs. But, and not much in the way of religious school, because there weren't many kids to teach, and there weren't people to teach. So, but I do remember very clearly that my father insisted that I learn the Shema. That was a requirement. But although it was a Catholic world I grew up in, and we were definitely part of the community. 2 things that I've come away with. I knew very well we were Jewish, and my parents' main social life was the group of Jews who lived there. They were the closest friends. I mean, we were certainly part of the community. My parents were part of the community, but the closest people were the Jews.
Thank you.
They were, well, I kind of like to say they raised me. They were always around.
So when you moved from Louisiana, where you came to Dallas?
Directly to Dallas.
And
yes.
where did you go to school here?
First, I went to Long Junior High because we lived in that area. And then my parents built a house at Abrams and Northwest Highway, which was a new area at the time. And that was in the Hillcrest School District. So I moved out to Hillcrest, and that's where I graduated.
And how'd you feel about getting to move to Dallas?
I was accepting. I was, kind of sad to leave my friends because I grew up with, in grade school, there were 4 of us in the neighborhood who were all right at the same age, and the houses were almost next door to each other, and we played together constantly. I had no brothers or sisters, so that was a lot of my social life.
Mm-hmm.
But we were together all the time, running around playing, cops and robbers, and kick the can down the street, and we didn't have toys with batteries. we had our imaginations, and it was a pretty good way to grow up.
What did you do after high school?
Went to the University of Texas, Austin.
And what did you do there?
I studied hard and had a good time. I managed to do both.
Okay. And did you get a degree in?
I had a Bachelor of Science in Medical Technology.
And was there any Jewish groups that you got involved in when
I
you
was
at the time?
not formally, but a lot of my friends were in Jewish sororities, and the boys I dated were in Jewish fraternities.
What was going on
Most of the
there?
boys I dated. I did have an incident where I was pretty fond of a boy I met who was not Jewish, and that caused a major ruckus in my family, quite an upheaval. So that had to come to a stop.
Mm-hmm.
My parents insisted I marry somebody Jewish. So they were having none of this nice guy from East Texas.
Okay. So, going back a little bit about Jewish affiliations, you did say you really felt that you didn't get the formal Jewish education from where you were coming from, but you definitely felt that you were Jewish, that you knew that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
Were there certain holidays that you remember celebrating?
No, I remember, well, we must have had we must have had Seder's, but I don't have much memory of that. I don't think Hanukkah was a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, it was no deal. That came much later in the Jewish community. What I do remember is High Holy Day services. Not in a good way, because it was before air conditioning, and it was bleakly hot in that little synagogue, and with no breeze, no anything, and we had to sit there for hours. So I didn't come away with happy memories of High Holy Day services.
After college, what'd you do?
Well, I met my husband the first week of college, and we dated some, and then off, and then back on, and got engaged before we graduated. So as soon as I graduated, we got married and moved to Houston, which was his hometown.
And how long did you stay there?
We were in Houston 5 years,
Okay.
and my first, quote, real job was in Houston.
How'd you
Did
like?
you want to hear about it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I was hired right out of school to start and run a research lab in microbiology for a physician who was a professor and consultant with Baylor College of Medicine. He was a specialist in infectious diseases, and he consulted on difficult infections. I was his tech, and it was a fantastic job.
And so you worked there till y'all moved.
Pardon?
Then you worked with him until you had to move the 5 years. Yeah.
No, I worked until I had our first child.
Okay. And who's that?
That's Brian Stone.
Okay.
His professional name is Brian Edward Stone. He is a researcher in Texas, Jewish history, and a history professor in Corpus Christi right now. So he was the first one, born in Houston. And then Edward left the company he was with in Houston and was hired by Procter & Gamble to be in the international division, and we were posted to Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. So from Houston to Toronto, which was quite a switch.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful move. We had a terrific time there. Loved the city. Found living in Canada to be absolutely terrific. So we were there for 2 years. They sent us to Lethbridge, Alberta for a few months, so we were out there for a while, near the mountains. On the prairie, though. The scenery wasn't great, but you could see the mountains over the horizon. And we got to spend some time, a fair bit of time in the Canadian Rockies. Back to Toronto. And then Edward was hired by Clorox in the United States. So we moved to California. And that's where our second child was born, Gregory Stone. And he is currently in Seattle and has been there for many, many years. And he's a software engineer in Seattle. And so he was born on the West Coast, and it was kind of funny because he was living on the West Coast by the time, before he was 20. I think the West Coast got into him somehow, and he's not going anywhere. So we have 3 Texans who stayed or came back to, all 3 of us came back to Texas after living elsewhere. He's not likely. So he was born in California, and then Edward was transferred to Boston. So we lived on the East Coast for a little while, and then back to Toronto for another 2 years.
So each time you're going to different communities, were you getting involved with the Jewish community there? Or weren't there long enough? I don't know.
There was not a chance for a lot of involvement because I had little kids, which is very limiting. And of course, nobody around to help take care of them while I went out and joined organizations. Child care where we were living was virtually non-existent. So, but we had Jewish friends. Some Jewish, some not. In Boston, there was a woman there that I knew through my parents here. It was part of the Wallman Kessler Ellis family, and she was living not far away. So we saw her. I think it was another Jewish couple we knew, and then in California, not really anything Jewish. Toronto, we had close friends who were Jewish, just not necessarily because we joined a congregation, but because the two guys found each other at work, realized each other was Jewish. We had Jewish neighbors down the street, and we're so close to all of them. We have a monthly Zoom meeting with one of them. Yeah. A few things about COVID turned out good. Not much, but things like that are. So that was so when we were in Toronto the second time and had Jewish friends who were native Torontonians, they would invite us to Seder. And then we also belonged to a group, and this may be shocking to some people. There was a Jewish humanist organization there. It was called Secular Jewish something. And we joined that to kind of be part of some sort of community. And what surprised me was the amount of knowledge these people had. It's not that they didn't want to know things. They had certain beliefs they didn't buy into, but their Jewish educations were solid, just absolutely solid. So on High Holy Days, for example, Rosh Hashanah, there would be an event at a farm somewhere, and they would do crafts and have things and celebrate in a way that didn't necessarily involve prayer, which was kind of a really different experience. But it let me know that I had a lot to learn. So, yes, the Jewish environment was definitely there, but we were part of the entire our whole little world.
So did you wait? Is this when you made your way back to Dallas after this?
After that, yes. After that, we came back to Texas.
And how old were your children at that time?
Brian was, I think, 7, and Greg was 3. So they were able to grow up in one place, and that was one thing Edward had in mind, because corporate world was going to be move, and he said, didn't want to do that. So we came back to my hometown and settled in here, and we've been here a long time now.
So when you got to come back here, what did you start doing with yourself? I know you were raising your children. Did you?
Yes, that was the main thing I did at first.
Yeah.
Kind of got reoriented. And then, of course, my parents were here, so there was a lot of involvement with that. They were plenty happy. And I had been here a little while, I think, and my next-door neighbor was a physical therapist at Richardson Hospital. And she told me one day they were looking for a medical technologist, particularly in microbiology. Well, there we go. It was a perfect fit because I was dying to get back to work. I had worked a little bit in Toronto, but could only manage it one day a week because of the childcare situation in the province of Ontario at the time. And so I worked part-time there, weekends mostly, and dealt with children. And whatever volunteer work I did at the time was kid-oriented, which is kind of typical.
How was it raising your children here? When you say back in the Jewish community, were you?
Oh, it was excellent. When we first came back, we joined Temple Shalom and enrolled them in religious school, and then started with Scouts. I guess. Well, started with Cub Scouts not through the temple, but through Brian's grade school. And I I got drafted to be the den leader in a new den. You know, when your kid says, "Mommy, please," it's kind of hard to say no. So I was den leader for him, his group, and then later on for our younger son's cub group. Volunteered as school nurse at the time, and then wound up with some part-time work during the week at the hospital. So I got to do both. I got to be home when the kids came home from school, but I got to have some challenging work and adults to talk to about things I like to talk about.
I know you had mentioned that you became members at Temple Emmanuel, and
Later, yes.
later, okay.
Later.
So you got active in different organizations as the years went on. Can you share with me?
Not a great deal of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't drawn to a lot of organizations. I joined National Council of Jewish Women, but I was more a supporting member.
Mm-hmm.
I would pay my dues every year, but organizations need that. And then I was asked to do something with Temple Emmanuel, involving the Caring Congregation startup, and I worked with that for quite a while.
And what did you do with the
Caring Congregation.
Yes.
I started out as a lay visitor for hospitals, which worked out quite well because I was very comfortable in a hospital, and then ended up chairing the overall program. There were several different facets to it, and I forget why that. I guess it came to an end when maybe that was about the time Edward wanted me to come into the consulting business. He had started a consulting business about a year and a half or so after we came back in marketing. And he needed some work from financial work and organization work from someone he fully trusted because he was spending too much time doing it. He needed to be concentrating more on clients. So that kind of stopped the volunteer work, mostly, not entirely. So I was able to do some of that from my desk, and so I could stay involved in Temple Sisterhood, but not as much something like Caring Congregation. I couldn't continue because I would spend half a day at Temple a lot. So that was pretty much the volunteer work I did. Volunteered as school nurse for a while, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing intense, nothing terribly heavy duty.
Well, you were working full time, so you were keeping yourself busy.
Well,
yes.
I was working in the lab. I was working part time,
Yeah.
and then after I got into the family business, that was absolutely full time. So there wasn't much room for anything else.
So is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you'd like to share with me, just about your life growing up, or places that you've been, family, anything that's come to mind as we've been talking?
Nothing has really popped into my mind that you didn't cover.
Okay. Well, the next thing that I'd like to for you to share with me is your involvement with the Texas Jewish Historical Society, which is such an important organization.
Many years ago, I became aware of the society. Well, it wasn't founded until 1980, I think. And then I became aware of it probably early 90s when my son was in graduate school. Brian was in graduate school and mentioned there was this organization and they had a bunch of files that were not really organized, and can we stop a minute? I need to scratch. So Brian started his graduate research, and he wanted to do Texas Jewish history. There was not much of it being done at the time, so he was, I think, one of the pioneers, and he was aware of the files there. And I believe, and I don't know for an absolute fact, but I believe he got some assistance, either encouragement or his graduate advisor was heavily involved in Texas Jewish Historical. I think he was, and I think he worked with some of the files, and then also other resources that were available, and they may have given him some financial assistance at some point. I know they did. I'm just not sure exactly at what point, because he has published 2 books and has another one coming out within a year or so, and has received grants. Texas Jewish Historical Society is very good about giving grants to researchers of all sorts. That's a plug. So that's where I became aware of it, and we joined because it's a nice thing to do to support an organization that's helpful to your son. And then Brian became quite active and was on the board for a while, and Edward and I just continued paying our membership. And then one day, a couple of years ago, I guess, I got a phone call saying, would you be on the board? And I couldn't think of a reason to say no, so I said yes. And so I joined the board and got somewhat oriented. By that time, Brian was not on the board, so we didn't overlap. And then the next thing I knew, I was asked to be a membership co-chair. And so that's been very satisfying. So that's what I'm doing right now.
You mentioned one of the things that you do is that you give money to people that are doing research.
Correct.
What other things would you say that the Historical
Society does?
Yeah.
There's a lot of tracking of cemeteries, so people will have information for research. There are 140-something cemeteries that we are aware have Jewish burials. Now that could be one person or a whole cemetery full, and a lot of those are in Dallas. Like we've got one cemetery commercially owned that has a bunch of different congregations with burial areas. But also they're scattered all over the state. I mean all over the state. There's a database on our website that lists all of those and the people buried in them. We have a couple of people who work on those constantly, updating with new burials, and then the other person works on updating information in some that are already in the database. And she will get pictures from Find a Grave and add it, and add links, and put in any corrections that are necessary. So it's probably a really good, accurate research resource. We also have a website that has an enormous number of family stories, because the Society has a magazine that comes out 4 times a year, and family stories are solicited to be published in it. And those are all on the website in PDF form and accessible to anyone. The other thing the Society does is have regular meetings. At one annual meeting that draws quite a few people, a couple hundred people, in various places around the state, small towns, big cities, and with speakers and activities. And then there's generally a smaller meeting somewhere, usually in a small town. And then cemeteries are checked out and supported. If they need work, then the Society is ready to do that. And the requests for grants we get are for all kinds of things. Some of them are films. One recent one was a photography project of small synagogues around the South, including Texas. And some really nice images came out of that. We were able to see some of them. We have funded authors doing research for travel or finishing, like buying photographs they need, which costs the author something. We have funded filmmakers, just anybody, people studying, sometimes need help with with expenses involved in studying something Jewish related, just a variety. And all of those people are also on the website, so if anybody wants to see what kind of things we do, the website has it. It's txjhs.org.
How many members do you all have? About?
600 and some odd, I think.
So is it like a membership dues?
Yes, we do have dues. It's a scale.
Yes.
Yes, starts very low for students, for example. And if someone wants to give us a lot of money, we're happy to take it.
So you mentioned
then-
there's a board.
Excuse me?
There's a board, and y'all are all over the state.
Oh, all over the state. Large cities, small towns.
Is there
everything.
like a central office?
It's sort of based in Austin. We have an executive assistant who lives in Austin. We have a number of members who live in Austin. Also, we have archives of all kinds of things, paper and objects, and the families have donated over the years, and that's at the Briscoe Center in Austin. So that too is in Austin. It's an active group. It was started by a rabbi in Galveston named Jimmy Kessler, who was a Texan and went to the University of, I think he was born in Houston, grew up in Houston, went to the University of Texas. He was a member of my husband's fraternity only after Edward was there. And then he founded the Texas Jewish Historical Society in 1980, and it has never stopped. It has kept going.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. That's a wonderful organization too, and it's wonderful that you're a part of it.
I've really enjoyed being part of it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure getting to
Pleasure for
visit.
me too.
Thank you.